Good evening and welcome everybody to the April 2024 meeting of the Metropolitan Washington Old Time Radio Club. And we have quite a busy night tonight, a lot of wonderful things. Our guest from the Zane Grey Society and Sally Stevens is going to talk about thises and that's. And of course, we have the quiz and so let us, do we have any other, I know Rosanne is visiting. Do we have any other visitors per se? I see Hank Ickes is on the call again tonight, which is lovely to see Hank, one-time friend of the club.
Wendy, up on my screen in the corner, you'll see Kathleen. Kathleen is a friend of Roseanne's, and she's with us tonight from Houston.
Well, welcome, Kathleen. I'm delighted that you've come all the way from Houston.
I'm also on. I'm Terry Bullen with the Zane Grey West Society.
Oh, hi, Terry.
Oh, wonderful. Well, welcome, Terry. Delightful to have you here. And where are you headquartered? Where are you?
I'm just basically outside of Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
Well, there you are. We're spread all across the United States tonight. That's just wonderful.
Yeah, we can only see about half of your head. I don't know if you can adjust a little bit there.
I'm eating dinner.
Yeah, he's doing a little Kilroy.
We don't need to see that. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's a little Kilroy action there. Anyway, so Sally, oh, and Hank's sister Helen is also with us tonight. Greetings and welcome, Helen. She's lurking in the background, so I didn't quite see her. Must be my cataracts acting up. At any rate, Sally, I think you're first up with the first 15. Do you require an ability to show and tell? You do. Well, I will make you, anyway, you need the credentials for your next step after this. So I will make you a co-host. So you have the keys to the kingdom. So there we are. And I will turn the meeting over to our wonderful Sally Stevens, a woman of many diverse talents. You need to unmute. Did that help?
I'm getting my screen ready.
There you are. Great stuff.
All right. Let me get this. Share screen. Go ahead. Share. All right. And should be able to see. Can you see my screen?
We can.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Great. Wonderful. Please go ahead and mute yourselves. And I will go ahead and present my screen here and take you along another accidental radio road trip. So not too long ago, you may recall that I took you along a radio road trip where my father and I ended up going from the Midwest back home to the East Coast, and we actually just happened upon several locations that happened to have radio connections. Well, this past summer, my family and I were heading out to the Black Hills for a summer trip, and we happened upon several locations again that just happened to have radio connections. And it truly wasn't planned, but I thought, I wonder if some of these places have radio connections for another accidental radio road trip. And it turns out a lot of the places we stopped at had radio connections. So I actually had to pare this trip down. But I hope you enjoy me as we take a little road trip together. So we were heading back out toward the Midwest. As I said, we were headed towards the Black Hills on our road trip, which is in South Dakota area. But to get there, we live in Washington, D.C. area, Virginia, Northern Virginia. And our first stop was out to Ohio, to the Hope Hotel, if anyone is familiar with, at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base there in Dayton, Ohio. And that was our first stop. And we have stopped there many times before. And I thought, wait a minute, the Hope Hotel, is that named after the Hope? Well, in fact, it is actually named after the Bob Hope. And there were pictures and images and information about Bob Hope right there at the Hope Hotel on the base. So a little bit about Bob Hope. He was born Leslie Towns Hope in 1903, and he was considered one of the most successful entertainers in almost all forms of media. His career actually spanned over 80 years. He's known for his rapid fire comic deliveries, known for his one-liners. And what really made him special and really stood him apart from other comedians is that during World War II, he began working with the USO. And he performed with the troops or for the troops overseas and stateside for over 50 years. And he actually became the very first U.S. honorary veteran for his service to the troops. And in honor of Bob Hope and all of his service for the troops, they named the Hope Hotel after him at the base. And if we could all just go ahead and make sure we are muted. And here's a couple pictures of Bob Hope performing across the decades. So you'll see him here in the 1940s, and then much later on when he was performing overseas with the USO. And a quote from Bob Hope: "Contrary to what you've heard, I did not entertain the troops at Valley Forge." Well, we don't think so. At least we hope not, but maybe. Who knows? One of his famous one-liners. So our first stop had quite a bit of radio connections with one of the most famous radio entertainers and comedians, Bob Hope. Now, as we continued on our not intentional radio road trip, we continued on into Nebraska, to Gothenburg, Nebraska, and we just happened to make a stop at a Pony Express station. And there was a sign saying that there was a Pony Express station here. And we thought, oh, well, that's kind of neat. The Pony Express is a really interesting part of our history. But how does it relate to radio? Well, the Pony Express was an express mail service using relay riders between Missouri and California. And it followed the Oregon and California trails, and it only lasted about 18 months. It utilized hundreds of horses, relay stations, and employees. Now, this specific station was built in 1854 along the Oregon Trail, and it was used as an express station from 1860 to 1861, and then it continued being used as a stage station. However, the Pony Express, while it was very successful and it was very progressive during its time, it ended due to the expansion of the telegraph line, wireless, radio. So I thought naturally that was a connection that it had right there. And this is the station here in Gothenburg. This is the actual station here that has been preserved by the community in the park there in Gothenburg, Nebraska. And inside, they had lots of images and artifacts. They even had kind of a display of a rider there as if he was staying there at the station. And this is the way they advertised for the Pony Express. Wanted, young, skinny, wiry fellows, not over 18. Must be expert riders and willing to risk death daily. Orphans preferred. That was the advertisement to get Pony Express riders to come and join and work for the Pony Express. And maybe we can see why it only lasted 18 months and can see why telegraph took over pretty successfully. As we continued on out west, we ended up actually following the old Oregon Trail. So we actually stopped at a couple of locations along the Oregon Trail, Scotts Bluff and Chimney Rock. Now, the Oregon Trail is a 2,170-mile wagon route which stretches from Missouri to Oregon, and it was used by over 400,000 settlers moving westward between the 1830s and the 1870s. Now, settlers noted and shared lots of landmarks as they traveled along the trail to help people who would be coming along later. And some of the most famous ones, for those of us who played the Oregon Trail game especially, and those who may have listened to different radio programs that took place along the Oregon Trail, certainly, Chimney Rock and Scotts Bluff were notable landmarks along the trails and also notable landmarks along this Pony Express route.
Why can't I hear that?
And the Oregon Trail was actually very prominent on radio. I kind of even just did a quick search, okay, how prevalent was Oregon Trail on radio? And so many different programs popped up right away. But primarily, there were two programs that took place right along the trail. Fort Laramie and the Frontier Fighters. But lots of different Western programs had episodes that took place along the trail. And several programs may have had additional storylines along the trail. So there was lots of Oregon Trail on radio, whether it was expressly stated or just kind of implied as people were moving out west and heading out farther west than ever before. And here's some images. So you can see this is the Chimney Rock, which is pretty iconic, especially when you're traveling out along the prairie. You can see here that, when you're traveling out this flatland, all of a sudden to see this very chimney looking rock, it's pretty substantial and would certainly catch someone's eye and be a landmark to see. And this is Scotts Bluff, which really is quite an amazing and beautiful site here. And this follows right along the old Oregon Trail in Nebraska. And I just added a quote from Woody Guthrie's musical songwriting skills. I'm gonna hit that Oregon Trail this coming fall, where that good rain falls aplenty, where the crops and orchards grow. I'm gonna hit that Oregon Trail this coming fall. Now, we continued on our road trip for quite some time. We headed out around the Badlands. Of course, we had to commune with the aliens at Devil's Tower, and we visited the Teddy Roosevelt National Park, and then we decided to head back east, heading across North Dakota. And our next stop was in Jamestown, North Dakota, because how could I resist a sign that said the world's largest buffalo was at this location? Well, of course, I was going to have to see this spot, but it turns out this was also the home of Peggy Lee, a figure that many of us are familiar with from radio. Now, Jamestown was a very fun stop. There was a place in the Frontier Village in Jamestown, North Dakota. As I said, it had the world's largest buffalo. And not only is Jamestown the home of Peggy Lee, but it's also the birthplace and home of Louis L'Amour, the Western author. So really interesting sites right there. And they were honored at the Frontier Village in the town. And Jamestown was founded in 1872 along the James River. And it was actually the town that was established right by the old Army Fort Seward. So that after that fort kind of closed down, the town sort of is what took over and was successful in that area. But Peggy Lee is the connection for Jamestown. Now, Peggy Lee, she was actually locally famous in North Dakota. She first sang on radio and KOVC in Valley City when she was still in high school. She then went on to more regional broadcasting and WDAY in Fargo, North Dakota, being one of the largest cities there in the state. And she joined Benny Goodman's orchestra in 1941 and really got her big break. And she has been seen on so many different radio programs, including the Chesterfield Supper Club, on many of Jimmy Durani's programs, all versions of Bing Crosby's radio programs. She's even guest starred on Duffy's Tavern and Command Performance. So not just singing, but also acting. And here's some pictures of the Frontier Village. It was a very cute and kitschy little town, and of course had to touch the buffalo beard of the world's largest buffalo. And they even had some sites there, the Louis L'Amour Writer's Shack and Museum. And now Peggy Lee, not only was she a famous songstress, but she also wrote many famous songs that a lot of people may or may not realize that she wrote. And here's one that she wrote, which is one of my personal favorite songs. Yes, it's a good day for singing a song, and it's a good day for moving along. Yes, it's a good day. How can anything go wrong? It's a good day from morning till night. It was perhaps made more famous by Perry Como, but it is one of Peggy Lee's more famous songs that she herself wrote. Moving on from our trip, we moved on and we are heading back east. And our guest stars tonight might recognize this location that we ended up in Ohio. We ended up in Zanesville. In Zanesville, Ohio, the home of Zane Grey. And this is actually how I made the connection about Zane Grey and radio, and how I even made a connection with the folks there at Mank. So we made a stop in Zanesville because not only in Zanesville there's a museum which is for Zane Grey, but also for the National Road, US 40, because Zanesville is a part of Zane Grey's family legacy. Zane's Trace became part of US 40, which was one of the original main highways heading out from east to west. And it is the home of Zane Grey. And now Zane Grey is known for his writing. However, he started his career as a dentist, which I thought was actually pretty funny. But he wrote over 90 books, and that is what he is most remembered for. And I'm not going to talk a lot about Zane Grey so that I won't give things away for our group tonight. But Zane Grey, his books, a lot of them were adapted, especially into films. However, not just films, but also into radio programs. So there was the Zane Grey Show, which was a little short-lived and really didn't have a lot to do with his own books. But then Dick Powell's Zane Grey Western Theater was a little bit more on par. And there's different speculation that perhaps some of his writings inspired the Lone Ranger. So lots of different connections with radio. And I'll leave some of that as a mystery and for some of our group to talk about tonight. But here's some of the images from the Zanesville Museum, which were very, very cool. It was a very interesting place. And it was really neat to see some of those scripts. And they had a recreation of his home and his writing studio there as well. And something that I also found interesting is that he had many interests beyond writing. He was very interested in baseball and fishing, which they had quite a bit in the museum about these items, and that he wrote several books about these topics as well. And a Zane Grey quote to close us out. I hope I have found myself, my work, my happiness under the light of the western skies. And then after we were back in Ohio, it was homeward bound, back towards the East Coast, and heading back on our summer journey, which happened to have quite a bit of radio connections. And hopefully we're going to be taking some more trips, maybe this summer. Who knows where we'll end up and who knows what we'll find. But it was certainly fun to find all of the radio connections as we traveled along the road this past summer, and to share them with all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally. That was just delightful. I look forward to going on your next trip with you. That was a long trip. I hope there were licensed drivers in the car, so one person didn't have to travel the whole distance, drive the whole distance.
Thankfully, there were 3 of us. So
Oh,
we
that's
were
that
each
is
other off, and yeah, yep. And
well,
that's
that's
why we took lots of breaks in between. So that's why you never knew what you were gonna find. Those great roadside attractions. You just never knew what we were gonna find. Love following those signs.
I think that's great. Does anyone have any questions for Sally? Well, I think we, as Sally said, we don't want to go too heavily into some of the stuff she touched on, because we have some real experts here tonight on Zane Grey. So
I think we can address some of the questions, like the Lone Ranger question and so on. So
right, I'm sure, and I'm looking forward to that. Sally, you need to put on your quiz mistress hat. Come on, put it on, put it on. No hat? Oh, Sally, I'm disappointed, but we'll manage. Oh, that's good. Very good. Well then, you already have the keys to the kingdom, so you have the ability to launch the quiz. And I turn the meeting over to Miss Stevens, our local school marm.
Excellent. Well, now that I have instructed you all on so many interesting and new things, I hope you all took notes, because there will be a quiz. Yes, I'm not seeing that there was that many people that took notes. I'm very disappointed in this class. Yes, very disappointed. Well, let's hope you took notes from before, because it is time for our quiz. So I hope you have your pencil and paper. I know Wendy is ready because I saw her materials. I know Wendy. Oh, I love to see that Kelly is ready. I see that is that John that's ready. Very good. I'm seeing some more of our class is ready. Excellent. It is almost teacher appreciation time, so it is time for us to appreciate all that our fine instructors do in not slapping your hand with rulers. You're welcome. You're welcome that we're not allowed to do that anymore. So be grateful. Now, I will be launching the poll here on Zoom, and you may go ahead and answer the questions faster than I can read them. I will read them and the answers, and then we will go over the correct answers following the main presentation. Are we all ready? Launching poll. Number 1. On our Miss Brooks taught which high school course? A. Math. B. Art. C. English. D. Theater. On our Miss Brooks taught which high school course? Number 2. What was the name of Miss Brooks's high school? A. Jefferson High School. B. Madison High School. C. Roosevelt High School. D. Wilson High School. What was the name of Miss Brooks's high school? Number 3. Mr. Boynton was Miss Brooks's romantic interest. Who was the first actor to play Mr. Boynton? A. Robert Rockwell. B. Ira Grizel. C. Gerald Moore. D. Bill Johnstone. Who was the first actor to play Mr. Boynton? Number 4. Jack Benny had a violin teacher. What was the character's name of Jack's teacher? A. Professor LeBlanc. B. Professor Leroux. C. Professor LeBleu. D. Professor Levert. What was the character's name of Jack's violin teacher? Number 5. Luigi Basco went to night school to learn English. What was the name of his teacher? A. Miss Ship. B. Miss Stevens. C. Miss Spalding. D. Miss English. What was the name of Luigi's English teacher? Number 6. Gildy's nephew, Leroy, took piano lessons. Who was his piano teacher? A. Mrs. French. B. Miss Piper. C. Miss Tuttle. D. Mrs. Bush. Who was Gildy's nephew's piano teacher? Number 7. Gildy and Judge Hooker took dance lessons and sparred for the romantic interest of their teacher. Who was she? A. Miss Wilmer. B. Miss Del Rey. C. Miss Cara Mona. D. Miss Monet. Gildy and Judge Hooker took dance lessons and sparred for the romantic interest of their teacher. Who was she? Number 8. Her husband, Dr. Hall, was the head of Ivy College. Who played the wife of Dr. Hall? A. Benita Hume. B. Mercedes McCambridge. C. Jessica Tandy. D. Kathy Lewis. Who played the wife of Dr. Hall? Number 9. Archie Andrews spent many years in high school. What was the name of his high school? A. Clay City. B. Riverdale. C. Hayes City. D. Rivers End. What was the name of Archie Andrews High School? Number 10. This actor spoke fluent French and more than once played a French teacher on our Miss Brooks. Who was he? A. Peter Lorre. B. Gerald Moore. C. Elliot Lewis. D. Mel Blanc. This actor spoke fluent French and more than once played a French teacher on our Miss Brooks. Who was he? Okay, I'm going to leave the poll up because a few are, still see some answers rolling in. So I'm going to let that run in the background. So you can let that keep on going while our presentation is going, and then I will end it after the main presentation, and we will see how well you have been paying attention in class. Let's hope very well.
Thank you, Miss Stevens. That was a very good quiz. I hope everyone did their homework.
All courtesy of Frank.
So now we're ready. We are just on the threshold of beginning the main part of the program tonight with our guest speaker. And I am going to pass the baton to Frank Morgan, who is going to introduce her to us. And Frank, you also have the keys to the kingdom. So you are a co-host. You do need to unmute before you start talking, however.
Okay. All right. This up. Okay. Our speaker tonight is Rosanne Vrugtman, and I hope she knows that I was going to have trouble with her last name. She's the current president of Zane Grey West Society. Rosanne has earned 5 degrees, including 2 masters and a PhD in education. I'm sure they are put to use in her work at University of Virginia in Charlottesville as the capstone technical writing instructor for 4th-year computer science students in the School of Engineering and Applied Science. Rosanne has 2 books in progress. One is to be entitled Everyday Intuition, Thinking Around Corners. Rosanne's PhD research involved the design and validation of an instrument to measure intuition. The second book in progress is the 5th of an historical romance mythology set in England in the mid-17th century. What's exciting is that they are based on stories of her own royalist ancestors, starting with her 9th times great-grandfather. Rosanne's interest in Zane Grey led her to publish Zane Grey, Legend and Legacy, a book commemorating Grey's 150th birthday in 2022. She has also edited and published contemporary editions of Grey's Frontier Trilogy, relating the exploits of his ancestors in the then wilderness of Western Ohio following the American Revolution. So I'm happy to welcome Dr. Rosanne Vrugtman to speak with us tonight.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, everyone. I am so pleased to be here. It scared me when he called me and I couldn't remember what I had promised to do. So a lot of what I've put together has been done since Tuesday of this week. So, but I have learned, it's been an adventure really, because I've learned so much more about Tex Thorne and the Zane Grey radio show, which I had no idea ever existed, and so on. So I'm going to go through a lot of that as quickly as possible, and then we'll see if you have any questions. Frank did put together some PowerPoint with the images from the presentation that I'm going to talk through, and you will get a copy, full copy of those notes after the fact. So Frank, are you ready to do that? And I'm going to you'll cover me up, I guess, and I'm going to go to my screen with my notes. So if I disappear, that's where I've gone.
All right, let me ask you a question. Obviously, you can't see my screen then yet.
No, I can't see it yet.
Okay, then I've got to go back here a second And
Yeah,
it's
we don't
but I
see a screen,
share
Frank.
screen. There we go.
Can you do a screen share?
Yep.
There you
You
go.
have it?
There we go. Great. Good job. Thank you.
Okay.
Finally. Okay.
Yay.
Well, hold on. Let me see. Now something happened to my notes. I didn't print them out, so that's, let me see. I don't, I didn't know this happened. Well, I think I have the information. So let me see if I can just talk through the presentation, if nothing else. So 1 second, let me get back to that. Okay. Go ahead and show us the first. There we go. I had no idea who Tex Thorne was, and I would venture to say that of our members, very few of them have any idea either. I learned a lot about Tex Thorne, which actually was not a character of Zane Grey's invention. It was probably connected to the comic strip and comic book, what we call now a graphic novel, but it was not originally written by Zane Grey. His name sold movie tickets and magazines and newspapers and all kinds of things. So just putting Zane Grey over the top of something made it sell back in his time. He was the best-selling author in the world, and I believe he was the first author to make over $1 million just from his writing. The first one. Louis L'Amour may have written more books, but Zane Grey was the first. Though he wasn't the first Western writer, The Virginian by Owen Wister is generally perceived to be that, but he certainly popularized the genre in a way that no one could have conceived. Most of us probably grew up in the 40s, 50s, and so on. And all those TV shows that we watched, and they're now coming back with Yellowstone and so many other things. Those TV shows are still rooted in the popularity of Zane Grey. This particular slide is The Adventures of Tex Thorne. It's called The Feud, which is the name of the episode. You can see it on, this is actually a clip from YouTube. So there are a number of other places on YouTube and on the internet that you can go to hear some of these radio shows, the original ones. I found out from Frank, and he probably knows more about some of this than I do by far. There were 12 episodes of what was known as the Zane Grey Show on radio. The first one that we know of is The Feud, The Adventures of Tex Thorne. It actually has production values. It has a narrator, it has various voices, male and female voice actors. It has sound effects and music, sort of like I perceived most of those radio shows at the time did have. That was the first one that's listed at this site on YouTube. That don't worry about it. I'll give it to you. It's called the Old Time Radio Downloads. I don't think that's yours, but you're probably aware of it. But they have 12 episodes. Frank mentioned that there were probably many more, and that would make sense. This one was aired in September of 1947, and Zane Grey was long dead by then. He actually died in 1939, but his name and his books were still being published and sold. New books were being published every year. In fact, the original of the last of the Duanes, which is also featured on these Zane Grey shows, was not published until 1996. So he maintained that popularity long after he died in 1939. You can go on into the next slide. So he wrote his most famous work, Riders of the Purple Sage, in 1912. He wrote The Last of the Duanes in 1914. And that surprised me because I had never read this book. I think I had this book somewhere in my stash, but I had never read this book, and I had no idea it was actually by Zane Grey. I know it says Zane Grey's latest novel, but I thought it was something that was done by his son, Loren. I think what it was, and Terry, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was later published under the auspices of Zane Grey Inc., which was at that time managed by Loren, and that would have been in 1996. It originally, however, apparently came out in the Argosy, which I was told, one of the things I learned was this Argosy was called the Golden Argosy, and it was a children's magazine. And The Last of the Duanes was perceived to be too graphic, too violent for that, but it later came out in, I think, 1936, I believe it was, or 1937, one of the two, in September of that year in the Argosy magazine. It was completed, it was the entire novel, and what I don't know is whether that was the original manuscript or not. Terry just informed me a little while ago, and I knew this, but I wasn't sure about the details. The book called The Lone Star Ranger was really a composite of The Last of the Duanes and Rangers of the Lone Star. Terry, did I get that right? And it was a very disjointed effort. The publishers decided to combine the two of these stories, which really were two separate stories altogether, both of them written in 1914. The Lone Star Ranger being the composite of those, there are elements that don't make sense. They don't fit together. They just sort of mishmashed the two together and called it the Lone Star Ranger. And in answer to Sally's query, probably not. The Lone Ranger was maybe inspired by, I wouldn't be surprised if it were inspired by Zane Grey and his work and his Westerns, but it was not based on the Lone Star Ranger. There's no evidence to show that, at least as far as I know. Go ahead.
If I might add, what actually happened was Gray had made a trip to Texas, had spent some time with Texas Rangers in the 1912, 1913 timeframe, and he actually wrote two different books, both of them in 1914. It was Rangers of the Lone Star and Last of the Duanes. He presented those to his publisher, Harper's, and Harper said, "We don't want to do two Texas Ranger books this year." So they told him to merge the two books together. So what he did was he took the first half of Last of the Duanes, and that became the first half of the Lone Star Ranger. Then he took the second half of Rangers of the Lone Star, and that became the second half of the Lone Star Ranger. It's the most disjointed book that you'll ever see. And as Roseanne said, the two books were actually published in magazine form, but they weren't published in book form until the 1990s.
Hi, I'm at my meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Frank, can you go ahead, and I know you're on the phone, I'm sorry about that. Can you go ahead? There we go. The Last of the Duanes, in addition to being a radio program, which there were 11 episodes. Oddly enough, the 11 start with number 2 and go through 12. There are only 12 episodes on the Old Time Radio download site. You can connect to all of them and hear them if you like. I listened to 2, 4, and 10 yesterday, and they're basically just one person reading the book as it was. Again, I don't know if it were the original manuscript. It must have been, but I can't tell you that for sure because I haven't compared the two. But there were also four movies filmed from The Last of the Duanes, and the handout that I will give you lists all of those. It's kind of interesting. By the way, let me mention our next convention, which is this October, will be in Lone Pine, California, where a lot of the Zane Grey movies were filmed. There were at least 110. No other author can touch him in that way. There may have been as many as 130, but at least 110. I don't know that anybody knows the exact number, but many of his books were still so popular years and years later or maybe they were so desperate for scripts, they filmed things 4 and 5 times. Riders of the Purple Sage has been filmed 5 times. I think the Border Legion was filmed at least 4 times. And I was surprised to learn that this book was filmed 4 times as well. This one happens to be William Farnham, who was one of the early silent actors. His books actually started with the silence. Go on to the next slide, if you would. Originally, Tex Thorne, as I mentioned before, was not a character from a Zane Grey book. There is no book called Tex Thorne Comes Out of the West. This is a big little book. Stephen Schlesinger, hard to say, Stephen Schlesinger was apparently Zane Grey's agent at the time. And this was done in the 1936, 1937 timeframe. King of the Royal Mounted was also, it's called Zane Grey's. That was also a comic strip, what was then called euphemistically an adventure series, which we now call graphic novels. So we have a lot of, speaking of language, we use a lot of euphemisms for some of these mediums. But this is a big little book. These were children's publications. They were illustrated. They were 3.5 by 4.5 by about 1.5, typically. They probably were, they were published by Whitman's, but they were probably an abridged version of the full story to imagine the size of the thing. But they were illustrated and they were very entertaining. I do not have a copy of Comes Out of the West. I do have a copy of King of the Royal Mounted, but Terry may have one or more of these. These are hard to come by, especially anything in good shape. This picture came from eBay. If you're interested, you can buy these right now for $29. So go on to the next one, if you would. This is one of the illustrations. So they were nicely illustrated and very interesting to young readers. And the thing I love about them is you didn't need your thumbs, and they weren't flashing lights and music in your face. You actually had to sit and read, and it taught children to love reading, which is where I came into Zane Grey. But one of the things that I found interesting, this is a side note having nothing to do with Tex Thorne, but someone had said, if you watch a movie, everyone watches the same movie. So you're seeing what the director wants you to see. If you read a book, everyone is reading a different book because it's coming out of your own imagination. And I just think that is such a wonderful idea. And anything we can do which is what we are doing, is one of our missions, to get young people especially interested in reading. That's what we're about. That's our mission. Go on to the next slide, if you would. This is one of the panels from one of the comic strips, the adventure series. Again, you'll see down in the corner, this was in 1936, Stephen Schlesinger Inc., which was Zane Grey's agent, and he connected with King Features Syndicate Inc. To do these comic strips in the newspaper. They were, you can also see on the left-hand side, Alan Dean was the cartoonist, or I would call him illustrator. These are not cartoons so much as comic strips. But this was from one of the actual newspaper items. And you can just see they were nice, colorful, interesting, a lot of action. So very interesting to young people. The interesting, to me, the interesting thing was that Zane Grey didn't really want, it seems, didn't want anything to do with this. Yes, it says Zane Grey's Tex Thorne and all that, but they used his name to sell the thing, and the idea of the Western, that all fit, but he was concerned about his image as a serious author. He had the critics, which he called crickets, by the way, the critics savaged him for the most part for his books. The fact that he laughed all the way to the bank, the fact that he outsold all of the literary giants of the day was a whole different thing. But it really stung him that he was not considered a serious author, even though he was the best-selling author in the world at the time. And one of his books is The Riders of the Purple Sage, is listed on the Library of Congress list of 100 books that shaped America. It's the only Western that made that list. So he's right up there with all those other so-called literary giants, just because he had more influence than probably any of them. And here's why. I was in a Rotary meeting and presenting this one day, and someone stood up with a very, very condescending question. Do you consider him a great author? And I said, I consider him a popular author. And here's the thing, popular authors had more impact on society than great authors. That may be a bad idea, bad thought, but that's the fact. Why? Because they were popular. More people read Zane Grey than read Ernest Hemingway. That's just a fact. Doesn't mean we study Zane Grey in school. We used to, by the way, but that's just how it worked. And because of that, Zane Grey was so touchy about his image as a writer. It was during or after the Depression, people didn't have the money they used to have. He wasn't making nearly as much money on his books, the movies, and so on, and he needed the money. So when Schlesinger came to him with the idea of doing comic strips and newspaper cartoons, he didn't want anything to do with it directly. But his son, he had two sons, Romer, the older one, was very interested in cartoons and comics. And so he put Romer in charge of the process, and Romer enjoyed it apparently, and he ran with it. So Tex Thorne was a product of these comics, and we do not know if Romer wrote the storylines. Probably Zane Grey approved the storylines, but he had nothing to do with the writing as far as we know. It may also have been a ghostwriter. We simply don't know. Go on to the next one, if you would. This is, there are 3 of these on our website, on our public-facing digital archives, which you may find interesting. You'll have the URL for that in the handout that I sent to you. But it says Tex Thorne by Zane Grey, but again, and this appeared in the Comic Weekly, 1937. So we have at least 3 of these pictured on our website that you can see and read and see. There's a lot of color, a lot of action. It was a big thing at the time. Go on to the next one. But again, and this slide is from my Zane Grey Legend and Legacy PowerPoint. It was during and after the time of the Great Depression, which severely cut back on book sales, movie sales, and all the rest of it. And this was critical, the 16th Amendment, which established the IRS and established income tax, had been passed, and Zane Grey now all of a sudden had to pay taxes on his income, which was considerable at the time. He decided to write off as much stuff as he possibly could, kind of like we do today, I suppose. But the picture at the bottom is the Fisherman 2, which was his second fishing boat. You may or may not know, in addition to being a dentist and also being invited, he didn't do it, but he was invited to play in the major leagues in baseball. Last year, 2 years ago, we actually donated the invitation letter to the Baseball Hall of Fame when we were there. But the Fisherman 2, he had some people create this Fisherman 2 because he was a world-class fisherman. He had 14 world fishing records. All of his fish were brought in on a line. He didn't machine gun them to death the way Ernest Hemingway did when he got tired, by the way. It may have taken him hours to bring them in, but they were all brought in on a line, and he invented a lot of his own equipment, rods and reels and so on, for fishing. And he is still considered, his books are still considered among the best fishing. But he had this Fisherman 2, he had Fisherman 1, smaller boat. He had Fisherman 2 designed, and it almost sank him financially. I read somewhere, I could be wrong, that, and remember the time frame, depression, and in that time frame, this Fisherman 2 that he had built, that he commissioned, cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000. Very few people at that time could afford to put that much money into the design of a boat. And this is where my Bobby Darin story comes in. I don't know how many of you have been to the St. Louis Transportation Museum. It's one of my favorites. If you ever go there, be sure to look up the Transportation Museum. One of the exhibits, my favorite, is Bobby Darin's electric car. I know it's a whole big thing today, but it wasn't a thing back when he had this thing designed. He had this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful electric car designed by his shirt maker. Yes, what could possibly go wrong, I ask you? His shirt maker designed the car, and it operated so badly that he would drive it, and then it would stop in the middle of the road, and he'd end up getting tickets and so on. Eventually, he donated it to the St. Louis Transportation Museum. It is a beautiful thing. When I redo my handouts for you, I'll include a picture of that for you. Go on to the next one. By the way, Dolly Zane, his wife, without whom there would be no Zane Grey, she was his editor, business manager. She negotiated all of the movie contracts and so on. She was amazing. She was the person who saved Zane Grey, saved the business. She decided about the same time to form Zane Grey Inc., which is still operating, I think, with his great-grandchildren in charge now. They sold off most of their assets a few years ago to Brigham Young University, which has the largest single collection of Zane Grey memorabilia and artifacts. But she saved them at a time. If it weren't for that, the whole tax thing would have sunk Zane Grey and his whole effort. This is the original Ace comic. This is the cover of the first issue. and you'll see Tex Thorne is right there. These were Blondie, Barney Google, Crazy Cat. It also had the original Believe It or Not series in there. These were major deals, and Tex Thorne was in the very first one. He was in the first 10 issues. Each issue had a dramatic series, and Tex Thorne was chosen from the Big Little books. That story was chosen to be in the first 10 of these comics, and then he was replaced by the Phantom, if you can believe that. Go on to the next one. The other 9 covers that Tex Thorne appeared in are also on our in our archives, by the way. That kind of gives you a bit of an idea. In the radio program, we only have 12 of the original episodes. Frank assures me, well, he suggested, and I suspect it's true, that there were more than that, especially since we don't have the first chapter of, at first in the first part of chapter 2 of Last of the Duanes. So there must have been more. If anybody ever finds them, let us know. But we at least have the 12, and they're very interesting if you want to go through them. Let me say one more thing about the feud. The feud was a strange, to me, strange episode, strange story. It had to do with Tex Thorne helping a person who killed the father of the woman he wanted to marry. That's never a good idea, by the way. But he killed her father, who was trying to interfere with him. He was somewhat obsessed with this young woman who didn't want anything to do with him, and then he went to abduct her and carry her off and marry her anyway. He was taken off to jail. Tex Thorne helped get him to jail. But Tex Thorne was convinced that he called him loco. We have different words today. There weren't any psychiatrists or psychologists to consult in the time, but they asked the local doctor, physician, and he said, yes, he thinks he's loco, and we shouldn't therefore hang someone who is not mentally at himself. So it was really, the feud was among the people, but it also had to do with Tex Thorne saving him from hanging. He ended up apparently in a mental institution, at least that was the sentence. So to me, it's a strange episode. It's 29 minutes and 45 seconds long. So the whole thing was probably 30 minutes at the time. But if you want to listen to it for yourself, it is available on that Old Time Radio download. And I just found it fascinating that these things have survived to this point, even though some of them probably are gone forever, like some of the movies, especially the silent films. But we do have some of this, so now we know more than we did before. I certainly know more than I did before, and I want to say thank you, Frank, for forcing me into doing this research. Okay. Any questions, let me know.
Thank you so much, Rosanne. That was just amazing. It's just mind-boggling. And the research is wonderful. Frank, do you want to disable the screen share?
Yeah, I wanted to say something, I think we should really appreciate the fact that Rosanne, in the short, as she mentioned, about the short time she really had to prepare, she actually listened to all of the available Zane Grey shows. So that in itself, particularly that one series, is kind of drags along, and as she mentioned to me and when we were talking about it, it's the first one, the feud, that has the attributes of the type of shows that we ordinarily listen to in our group on the radio, whereas the other one kind of dragged. It had, one or two voices playing all the parts, and it was a little.
I will say it was a little amusing to listen to a male voice doing Zane Grey's female voices because they were all written. This is just an interesting caveat, I guess, that I find when I read Zane Grey's books. The females tend to speak breathlessly. There are a lot of dashes and ellipses and things like that, like they can't get their minds together. I personally find that annoying. I will tell you. Like, oh, we're all, oh, and they're always so emotional and so on. I think that was just Zane Grey's portrayal of women, but I will give him credit. Women, even now, women loved Zane Grey as much as men. It wasn't just shoot 'em up westerns, you know, cowboys and Indians and trail drives and stuff. They were all. Arthur Kendall had said, and I think this is so brilliant. If you ask most people what Zane Grey wrote, they would say westerns. But if you asked Zane Grey what he wrote, he would say Western romances. And at least 16 of his original books were not published in book form. They were serialized in McCall's and half a dozen other, 2 or 3 at least, other magazines, including the original Cosmopolitan. It changed over the years, but Cosmopolitan, his books were serialized, and women used to get together weekly in their coffee klatch and read out loud the latest episode, the latest chapters in whatever serial it was. It is a he was a phenomenon. Nobody's ever been able to figure it out exactly, to put their thumb on what it was he had, but he had something. It might not be the same thing today with our sophisticated audiences, but we think that his stories are worth preserving.
Rosanne, tell us a little bit about the activities of your society.
The society is 42 years old. This will be our 42nd convention in Lone Pine in October. Terry can tell you more about it than I. He's been there longer, and he was president for 13 years. I've only been president for 1.5 years, so, you know, but there's that. I have been on the board for 15 years, and I've watched us go from basically conventions and our journal, which we still publish, which is one of our major things. Now we are doing digital archives, which I believe you're doing as well. All of our archives, everything we can find, including this Tex Thorne information, is now, and the links to the radio programs are now going to be on our public facing archive, which you're welcome to search through. You might find something else of interest there. But the society is international. We're small but mighty. At one point, when I first started, I think our average age was 78, which hasn't gone down since then. But we have the most amazing group of volunteers. You probably know what that's like. People who are interested enough in the same things to get together or on their own do things on behalf of the society. We don't pay anybody to do anything. So all of that is out of our own pockets. This will be my 3rd MANC, Mid-Atlantic Nostalgia Convention. And I will be in Zanesville, Sally. I will be in Zanesville April 27th. Yay, if anybody can make it, they have their annual Zane Grey Family Days then. They'll have an old-time vintage baseball game. They'll have all kinds of things for the children. It'll be open house. Anybody can come and go. We will have a booth there. We'll be walking people through the Zane Grey exhibits and selling books and giving out brochures and things. So come and join us there if you can. There are 3, I'll say this, 3 Zane Grey museums still active. I don't know how many Ernest Hemingway has, but Zane Grey still has 3, 82 years after he died, or 57 years after he died. over 150 years since he was born. One is in Zanesville, which is his birthplace, which was founded by and named after his great-grandfather, Colonel Ebenezer Zane. Jonathan Zane, his great uncle, was the person who formed Zane's Trace on behalf of Thomas Jefferson, by the way, now National Highway 40, but National Road, Highway 40, originally called Zane's Trace, because it was commissioned and the Zane family carried it out. And so there's Lackawaxen, which was the first home that Zane and Dolly had, Lackawaxen, Pennsylvania, for those who haven't been there. It's just on this side of the, it's borders the Delaware River and Lackawaxen Creek, just this side of New Jersey. And also Payson, which is where Zane Grey had one of his mini cabins. And one of the things we do is preserve the cabins and other sites. By the way, we're thinking about, because I'm a Missourian originally, we're thinking about doing a convention at some point in the next couple of years in St. Joseph, Independence, where all those trails come together. Mormon Trail, Oregon Trail, California Trail, and the Pony Express all formed right there in basically my home in Missouri. The other thing you might be interested in is every Labor Day in Wheeling, West Virginia, which is what we now call the place that Colonel Ebenezer Zane and the Zane family called Fort Henry. They have Fort Henry days, and they have they have tents set up and people are doing things in the original way. They have reenactments. They shoot off a cannon, scare you to bits. They teach you how to do the dances of the time and so on. It's a wonderful time, and we're going to be there as well. So though that gives you in 3 words or less what Zane Grey West Society did. Let me say one last thing. If it weren't for the convention, I wouldn't still be involved. The convention, Kathleen will bear me out on this. The convention is wonderful. People get together. It's like family reunion, only better, because you aren't fighting with all these people all year. And it's just a warm, embracing, wonderful, exciting thing. It's like this, but you're all in the same. So please come. I'll send you information about it. That's it.
Wonderful. Does anyone have any questions or curiosities? Or John Abbott.
Yes. I thought it very interesting when you said that Brigham Young University has a large collection of his materials, because in Riders of the Purple Sage, he pretty much savages the Mormons. I thought that was very interesting.
It's interesting, and there's the Mormon trilogy. There's more than one book that deals with the Mormon religion. He loved the Mormons. He loved the people. He didn't get their religion. He didn't get the whole, polygamy thing. He didn't get that. And he does kind of savage that in that book. Yes, that is true. And that question has been asked of BYU many times. There is a sequel to that called The Rainbow Trail, which is another savage attack on the Mormon religion. By the way, the armed services books, the little books that fit into the pocket of the servicemen, they published back in the day during World War II. They did, I think, 11 of those. They did not publish Riders of the Purple Sage in that format. Why? Because it attacked a religion. That's what it was perceived to have attacked the religion. So they did not do that one. But one of the 2 people he said influenced him most was, my mind is gone.
Jim Emmett.
He was a Mormon. He had more than one wife. He had many children. He used to be in charge of running ferries across the Colorado River at Lee's Ferry. And Zane Grey was incredibly influenced by this person and wrote very favorably about many of the people. He loved the people, he just didn't buy their religion.
If
Thank
I
you.
might add one more comment, specifically answering your question, I actually asked one of the guys at BYU one time with some of the issues that Gray had with the Mormon religion. Why do you have such a large collection of Zane Grey material? And he told me the background of the libraries at BYU was they collected anything that had anything to do with the Mormon religion, whether it was negative or positive. And so he said Zane Grey was a big part of early Mormon history, and they have probably the world's best collection of Zane Grey material.
And I will add that they had, in addition to whatever materials they had come up with before, that they had compiled before, they bought the co-founder of Zane Grey West Society, Dr. Joe Wheeler. They bought his collection when he decided to downsize. So they have his entire collection. And they also bought the collection from Zane Grey Inc., which it took a month to catalog all of that. By the way, nobody knows that includes a lot of film memorabilia. It includes photographs, images, and all kinds of things, and a lot of the original manuscripts. It does not include Riders of the Purple Sage manuscript. Nobody knows where that is.
I enjoyed your program tonight.
Thank you.
And I actually was in Lackawaxen, Pennsylvania about 30 plus years ago. And I do remember seeing something about, I think they have a little museum there or something.
They do. It's actually now administered by, after Zane Grey sold it, they went west because that's where the movie companies were, and now the movies were getting famous, and it seemed convenient to be in California where the movies were. So they built a home in Altadena, California. Eventually they hung on to Lackawaxen home for a while, eventually sold it. It sold once or twice, and then nobody could keep it up. It was one of those big old rambling houses. It was right on the confluence of the Delaware River and Lackawaxen Creek. So when the rivers rose, it could flood the house. And they eventually, a few years ago, I guess the National Park Service took it over. It's on the National Register, and the National Park Service now administers it. They've made some changes. There is a room that has a lot of the original stuff. And 2 years ago, we had our Zane Grey West Society board meeting in his study upstairs, which was kind of a treat. But they've turned a lot of it into a museum and welcome center. There was no welcome center on this side of the Delaware River, and they needed one. And it was the way to get more people in and also to keep it going, so they didn't have to close it down. So as much as it may break our hearts in some ways, I think it's a good use of the facility. In mid-July, bad timing, very hot, very muggy, but it's beautiful there. We will be in Lackawaxen. We always are every year, doing our thing, and I'll be doing a presentation there as well again this year.
Dennis, you have your hand. Dennis Stevens, you have your hand up.
Yes. This is Dennis Stevens, Roseanne. What part of Missouri are you from?
Well, I don't like to admit it to people I've just met, but I'm what we call downstate. I don't know what you call it elsewhere. We would call it downstate. There's St. Louis City, County, Jefferson County, St. Francis County, and the next county down from that is Madison County. 3,500 people in my hometown, which was the county seat, Fredericktown, part of Madison County. That's where I'm from.
Okay. Well, I'm from Raytown, a little town near Kansas City.
You're on the wrong side of the place. We're down the other way. I was born in Poplar Bluff, which is basically the Boot Hill. So that tells you all you need to know about me.
Did you go to Mizzou?
No, I worked for the last 12 years of my regular career for the University of Missouri St. Louis. Yeah, so there's and I got my PhD from there, my second master's and my PhD from there. So it's a place dear to my heart, but St. Louis was home for about 40 years. It's no longer home. I'm home in Stanton, Virginia now.
Oh,
Ah, my
That's,
uncle
uh,
lived in Stanton. I love that town.
It's a beautiful town. It's one of the top 10 tourist sites to visit, small towns that you might want to visit. It's an absolutely beautiful town. By the way, it predated all that other stuff we've been talking about. It's 1732, 1742, something like that. We've been around long before the Revolution, the American Revolution came along.
It also
You're
was
kind
a
of
great-
reassuring as somebody who wasn't born there that you actually pronounced it correctly.
Is that right? If it's Staunton, it is
But
not
it's
Staunton.
It's
It is
Stanton.
Stanton. There's Staunton, Missouri, Staunton, Pennsylvania, Staunton, other places. It's Stanton here. And I think it was a shibboleth. During the Civil War, they knew who was from here and who wasn't by the way they pronounced the town's name. By the way, quick history, two quick things. Sorry, I get so excited. First of all, we are in Stanton, which is an independent city within Augusta County, which at one time was the largest county in the world. We literally stretched from the Shenandoah Valley to the Pacific Ocean. And if you are in Pittsburgh, which was originally Fort Pitt, you probably know, if you live in Pittsburgh and you want to see the town founding documents of Pittsburgh, you don't go to Pittsburgh, you come to Stanton, Missouri, Stanton, Virginia. Those documents are in the basement of our courthouse because you were part of Augusta County in that time frame. And by the way, the other thing is that I'm told, I don't know if it's true, it could be a fabrication. The town of Stanton village originally was never bombed and no battle was fought here, not during the Revolutionary War, not during the Civil War. And I asked somebody why. We had the railroad, Stonewall Jackson came and went. I mean, it was a big deal at the time. They said because this is where the bars and the brothels were, and nobody wanted to interfere with that. I don't know if that's true. That's what I'm told.
It was also the birthplace of Woodrow Wilson and houses the Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library.
It
So
does.
many kind of intersections of history at Stanton.
Exactly. And I
Where
will
the
tell you,
Statler brothers are from. Come on,
I was
Wendy.
just going to say
Come
that
on.
they have now converted a room in the Wilson Museum to the Statler brothers, who are from here, the Reeds. Their names wasn't Statler and they weren't brothers.
It was
But
from
you know,
the tissue box.
it came from a tissue box. You are well traveled, man. They took the name off a tissue box. Statler too. There's a box of them there. Somebody had one, and but we're very proud of them, and we have a lot of monuments to the Statler brothers. And they come and go. They still have family here. Their homestead is still here. The Reed brothers. So
Great stuff. Other questions or observations? Anybody?
what
Well, this has been-
I don't know, I make up. I often would say that. I would a student would ask me a question and I would say this, long answer, and they would nodding, and I'm going, was that convincing? Because I just now made that up. So, but this is the truth as I know it.
Well, this has been absolutely delightful. You are a font of information, Rosanne, and it's lovely to meet you. And you're not that far from Northern Virginia, so I used to go back and forth to Stanton a lot.
good. Well, come back and visit. Now that I live here, we can.
Wonderful. Yes, and you're not far from UVA there.
No,
Although you do have to
45
go
minutes.
to 81, which is not fun if it's bad weather, but and some breaks. And you do have a very well recognized Shakespeare theater there.
We do.
The
in fact,
American, the
in
American.
fact, Mark and I were talking. I think it was Mark and I were talking about that. It was formed from the original Shakespeare theater. It's in the round. It is a magnificent architecture, and they do wonderful work there. The shows are great. If you ever come, be sure and get a ticket.
Seen many shows there. I have a lot of colleagues who worked there as well. So this is just delightful. My goodness. So any other hands? I don't see any hands raised, but this has just been absolutely delightful, and we look forward to the handouts you mentioned that Frank is going to distribute to all of us. Probably
I'll send you the amended version probably tomorrow, Frank. You'll get more information. I'm also probably going to turn, now that I've done all this work, you never write what you don't plan to publish, right? Isn't that the rule? So I'm probably going to make an article in our Explorer journal related to this. And I do give your club and this talk a mention in my president's column, which I call Meanwhile Back at the Ranch. In my president's column in this coming issue for May.
Well, thank you
so much. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Well, thank you for sharing your knowledge and with the club. I mean, we've actually, this is one of our larger attendance. So you are definitely a celebrity draw.
Well, that's good to hear. I've been called disruptions. I've been called all kinds of things. So knowing I'm a celebrity draw, I'm going to write that in my book now. Thank you so much. I'm gonna let you go back. I know you have other work to do. Thank you so much for inviting us. It's been delightful.
Feel free to come back anytime and stay in touch if you've got other projects going that you think would be of interest to us. We would love to have you back.
If that comes up, we will, and I'm sure I'll see Frank at Mank, right? You'll be there, so.
Yes.
You'll
we'll
probably
talk.
see me too, because
good. Okay, stop by our.
That's kind of my job right now, being president of our club.
Okay.
So
yes, I know the feeling. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for paying attention, and thank you for your questions.
You're welcome to stick around and hear the answers to the questions.
I have a dog that is now aggravated with me, so I better go.
Oh boy, Miss Stevens might fail you for that one, but maybe she's in a good mood tonight. We'll see.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Rosanne.
Right.
So everyone, I think Miss Stevens has the answers to our.
Get in a better mood. Let's find out.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, I didn't want to sort of out you as she has a nice glass of wine, she'll be much more mellow.
It will help the grading curve.
No, there you
help
go.
You
Perfect.
all, since clearly so few of you have been studying. I'm very disappointed.
Oh no, don't
very
disappointed. Its
disappointed.
cover, Miss Stevens.
So
Really.
few of you have
Wendy,
been studying.
If I could just make one comment real quickly.
Certainly.
I want to thank Sally, because Sally is the one who put me in touch with Rosanne. She met her at Mank last year, and I appreciate it very much.
Well done, Sally. Thank you.
Well, it was all because of that accidental radio road trip that we. I was like, "Hey, I've been to Zanesville." And it's sort of serendipitous.
Well, these two programs dovetailed really beautifully.
So yes, it did actually work out very nicely.
Well done, Frank. In terms of scheduling, well done. So moving right along at breakneck speed, Sally, would you like to give us the correct answers?
I'm
Or
going to
maybe
end
we
the
all have
poll.
the correct answers, who knows, but
Well, we'll find out. I'm going to end the poll. So if you haven't gotten your answers in, too bad. Can you see the results?
yes, I can.
Excellent. All right. So you can follow along. However, just because the majority picks it does not mean that it is correct. Remember that, class. Remember that. Let's see how we all did. Get your answers out. Your answer sheets out. Trade your papers. Well, sort of. All right. Number 1 on our Miss Brooks. What class did she teach? Thank goodness everyone was paying attention, at least during that class, and everyone was in the appropriate English class. Everyone appropriately selected C for English class. Excellent. However, do we notice we never learn any English during that program? We really could use some grammar lessons, and we don't. Just a side comment. Number 2. What was the name of Miss Brooks' high school? Well, it must be one of these old dead presidents. Jefferson, Madison, Roosevelt, or Wilson. Which one is it? Well, no one thought she attended or taught high school in Stanton, Virginia, because it's not Wilson. A couple selected Jefferson and Roosevelt, but the overwhelming majority this time is correct. The correct answer is B, Madison High School. Madison. Popularly known as the father of the Constitution. Number 3. Mr. Boynton was Miss Brooks' romantic interest. Now, who was the first actor to play Mr. Boynton? I'm sure many of us panicked when we didn't see who we expected to see as an answer. Am I correct, class? Yes, I had a feeling because I equally panicked. Remember, I don't read these tests and quizzes before the meeting. So I was like, I have no idea. If it's not William Chandler, then I have no idea. So we clearly had no idea. We were spread all over the place. We equally selected Robert Rockwell, Gerald Moore. A few of us went more for Ira Grizel. Somebody picked Bill Johnstone. Who knows? The correct answer goes to our tiny little majority of B, Ira Grizel. What did he go on to do? Not a clue, but he didn't stay on as Boynton, that's for sure. Passed on that one. Number 4. Jack Benny had a violin teacher. I'm not sure if he should have paid that man and if we could really call him a teacher. However, we'll go with the benefit of the doubt and call him one. What was the character's name? Well, most of us selected Professor LeBlanc. Some of us went for the other Professor Le somethings.
Wait, Sally, can we do something and move on to the next page, please? I don't know who has control of this, but I'm a little frustrated. I don't see question number 456.
No, what you do is you scroll up. You scroll, you're controlling your screen.
We
of
have
what-
individual control, thank you very kindly.
Yep,
You
you do.
have power.
So you scroll. I don't know if you're on a tablet or if you're on a desktop or what kind of device you're using, Hank, but you just, if it's a tablet, you just move it
Not
up.
to worry, not to
You did-
worry, I figured it out.
Yay! Thank you, Hank. Carry on, Miss Stevens.
Excuse me, class. We have a side note of information coming from our test maker. Excuse me, Frank. you have something you would like to share about the name Ira Grizel?
You're on mute, Frank.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute. Yeah, Ira Gazelle was the name that he used until he became Jeff Chandler. And he finished up on Armis Brooks as Jeff Chandler.
Well, wasn't that sneaky?
That was sneaky.
That was a trick question, class. And that is why you should study.
I think he deserves a trip to the principal's office.
That earned Frank bonus
We'll talk after
and naughty
school.
points. He's going to earn points and then they're going to be promptly taken away.
Yeah.
So he's going to end up back at nothing. But that was very sneaky and very clever.
So we're
Frank,
back to
we'll
question
speak
4.
after class when you're in detention. Number 4. Violin teacher, or so-called, of Jack Benny. What was his name? Professor Le something. The majority gets it this time. A is the correct answer. Professor LeBlanc.
Just out of curiosity, whose idea was all of the color puns?
That was our Frank who put together the quiz to begin with. He does the whole thing. He thinks up the questions and the answers.
I think it helps if you know French,
Well, yeah, it does.
which I don't.
Ah, it's le bleu, by the way, which is bleu being blue. It's
I
not
took
far from English.
I took Spanish for a very long time. Puedo hablar en español, no sabes francés. Entonces, número 5. Number 5. Luigi Basco went to night school to learn English. And what was the name of his teacher? Oh, someone voted for me. That's so nice. Someone voted for me. I also love that a couple people voted for Miss English because I thought, hey, that sounds certainly plausible to me. But we were leaning towards Miss Spalding, and a few of us went for Miss Ship. So it had to be someone with a S sound in their name. And the correct answer also has a S sound in its name. Phonics. C is the correct answer. Miss Spalding. C, Miss Spalding. And of course, somehow Frank always manages to include the Great Gildersleeve. Just always manages to include Gildy. I just don't know how, but somehow he does. It just frosts my cakes. Number 6.
He could put B. Benaderet in there instead.
That name is not allowed. I'm about to kick you out of this classroom, sir. I'm about to kick you out of this classroom. Do you want to speak again? You raise your hand. Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. Mm-hmm. Speak to you after class and detention as well, Mr. Abbott. Gildy's nephew, Leroy, took piano lessons. And who was his piano teacher? I love how many people selected Mrs. French, who is a real piano teacher. Our lovely Mrs. French is a real life piano teacher. However, that is the incorrect answer. Mrs. Bush, I don't believe she is a piano teacher. Maybe she is. I do not know.
Flute.
I didn't think it was piano,
It
but
was flute.
it was also not the correct answer. So we were down, if you were using your test taking strategies class, which we are working on as we're getting close to the SOLs. State testing for those who don't live in Virginia. It was either B or C. Well, the majority wins at this time. Miss Piper was the piano teacher, Miss Piper. Makes sense? Pipes? I don't know. There's no pipes and it's not an order. I'm trying to think of something. Nothing. It's Gildersleeve. Why am I trying? Number 7. Gildy and Judge Hooker took dance lessons and sparred for the romantic interest of their teacher. Who was she? Oh, Wendy. It could have been you. It could have been you, Wendy, Miss Wilmer, but it wasn't.
Two
Okay.
people thought it was, so there.
But
Nah.
it's not. That is the incorrect answer. A is incorrect. The majority went for B, Miss Del Rey. A few people selected Miss Caramona and some selected Miss Monet. Well, the correct answer is B, Miss Del Rey. Miss Del Rey. Maybe she lived in Arlington.
Alexandria.
Whatever. Please, you're like my students. You really are. You get correcting all the time. Detention for you too, Wendy. Number 8. Her husband, Dr. Hall, was the head of Ivy College. Who played the wife of Dr. Hall? Kathy Lewis got no votes. Sorry, Kathy. Cambridge and Jessica Tandy got a few votes, but Benita Hume overwhelmingly got the most votes. A, Benita Hume is the correct answer. Benita Hume. Bonus points if you can name who Dr. Hall was.
Ronald Coleman.
Did it have an E in his name?
No.
You're still in detention. Number 9. Archie Andrews spent many years in high school. What was the name of that high school? Well, no one thought it was Hayes City or River's End. A few voted for Clay City, but most people went for Riverdale. And if anyone's been watching the most recent CW TV show, you would know the answer to this. Though, if you've been watching it, you would also probably say, this is not the Archie Andrews of radio or comics. That's a discussion for a different day. The correct answer is B, Riverdale. Number 10. This actor spoke fluent French and more than once played a French teacher on Our Miss Brooks. Who was he? We did not study. I can tell when we are all over the place. It is not the teacher's fault. It is the student's fault for not studying. Very disappointing. We were all over the place, selecting almost equally Peter Lorre, Gerald Moore, or Elliot Lewis, and at least Mel Blanc still got a vote because his name is Blanc. Maybe that's why someone selected him, which I say good on you. But the correct answer is you're dying of suspense? B, Gerald Moore. Gerald Moore spoke fluent French and played a French teacher on Our Miss Brooks. D is the correct answer. So there we have it. Well done, Frank. Easy.
Yes.
Yet not.
Very well done.
No.
Well done, Miss Stevens. Even though she feels a little disciplinarian-esque sort of today. More so than usual. I think it was a rough day at school. Have another glass of wine, Miss Stevens. Excellent quiz. The irony is Sally never looks at these things beforehand, but if she had waited to just pull the sheet up just before the meeting, she would. The original answer sheet was way off. Way off. There wasn't one answer on there that could even remotely be attributed to the questions that were set up. So thank you, Frank, for straightening that out. I appreciate it. Clearly, he works a couple of months ahead. So the thing, we got the answer sheet to next month's questions, but actually next month's questions were meant to be this month's questions. So Frank and I had a little bit of trouble getting on the same wavelength. I kept saying, I need the correct answers. He said, you have the correct answers. I said, no, I don't have the correct answers. And so it went. Fortunately, I knew the answer to number one. So I felt pretty solid on that one. And so now this is the time when we stop recording for posterity, and we will move to the business part of the evening. So the recording will be stopping in 3, 2,